This demonstration video will show you how to complete a still life value drawing in graphite. The suggested materials that you need for this project is 14 by 17 inch drawing paper, different grades of graphite leads. I suggest you HB all the way through 8B, kneaded eraser, a plastic eraser, a perfection eraser, which is the pencil type eraser that you can sharpen. The instruction for this project is for you to create a full-scale value drawing in graphite, establishing a chiaroscuro, paying close attention to utilizing graphite and erasers to distinguish highlight, light, reflected light, shadow, core shadow, and the cast shadow of each object. These are called the 6 categories of light and shadow. Again, they are the highlight, light, shadow, core shadow, reflected light, and the cast shadow. These 6 categories can be broken down into 2 distinct areas. The first is direct light. The direct light includes highlight and light, and it refers to the surfaces of an object that are in the direct path of a light source. They are consequently the brightest and the lightest of the entire range of values on a form. The second category is called the indirect light. This includes the shadow, core shadow, also known as core of shadow, reflected light, and the cast shadow. This category refers to surfaces of an object that are not in the direct path of a light source. These surfaces are revealed and become visible only through bounced or reflected light rays and are consequently never as bright or as light as the indirectly lit surfaces of a form. I'm hoping through this project you create an ability to recognize these distinct categories of light and shadow. And by doing so, drawing value structure with accuracy and sensitivity. It is suggested that you begin with objects that are somewhat limited in their complexity, mixing regular forms with irregular forms, as well as cubic forms. Regular forms are man-made objects that are regular or symmetrical in form. Examples can include a wine bottle, a glass of cup, a vase, or any sort of container. Irregular forms are organic objects derived from nature. Examples could include a variety of fruits and anything that you can find in nature. The last category is called cubic forms, which can include any cubic objects such as boxes or any geometric objects in which you have to pay close attention to how they sit in your plane of view along with the perspective. It is helpful if you can identify if the cubic form is in 1-point perspective or 2-point perspective, and where it is sitting in relation to your eye level. When you do this project, I recommend that you follow a general to specific approach to building value structure. When you first start sketching out the composition, I recommend you use the line of sights, compare the heights of one another, and compare ratios of one another. Also, look at the relationship between the positive form and the negative form. Starting with big negative shapes first to place the composition on the paper. Your big negative shapes can be further divided into smaller sections, and your long lines can be further divided into short lines. And the more and more time you spend on the composition, the more accurate your proportions and placements will become. The same general to specific rule would apply to when you target the value. When you use a general to specific approach, it helps you to create a well-orchestrated drawing because you're starting with big features, big shapes of lights, big shapes of shadows, and it helps you to compare different parts of drawing with another, and it helps you to fit the pieces together. You can also break down big shapes of shadows and lights into smaller, different values that are happening within. So it is recommended that you first identify general categories, the dark values, the middle values, and the light values, and distinguish them clearly. And then you can further pay attention to the subtle transitions of values that happen within the bigger sections that you created. Imagine this process as building a house. When you build an architectural building, you would probably start with scaffolds and basic structure, foundational structure first. And then you would start adding details such as framing of the window, the floors, wiring, drywall. So it is helpful if you start with big sections of values from dark, middle to light, and then further divide this into smaller values. Now remember, the goal of this project is for you to create a full range value drawing, which we also call the chiaroscuro. So it's going to be really helpful if you could exaggerate the contrasting values. So you can make the big general value of dark pretty dark, and keep the middle value right in the middle. Keep the light values very light and subtle. You can use pencils such as HB and 2B to create the light values. Once you are able to distinguish the sections into dark, middle, and light, go ahead and start identifying the subtle change in values happening within those sections. When you do that, you can use different techniques such as layering and the subtractive value or the subtractive method to continuously layer and subtract with eraser. And your goal is to create a full range of value in your still life from value 0 all the way to value 9. It is also very important to identify the light source. Especially for the beginning drawing student, it's super helpful if you can keep your light source as singular as possible. Try different strategies such as taking a clip-on light, illuminating from above. You can move the light to slightly different position towards left or towards right, and find an optimal place where you find a place where your forms are illuminated in a way that you like. The shapes of shadows also matter. Depending on where you place your spotlight, you can create different types of shadows. So also focus on the shapes of shadows and light, then creates an attractive perspective or attractive composition for you. Another thing I want you to focus on is the edge quality of shapes. Try to look for the hard edge to soft edge transitions. Does the value end abruptly on one edge and make a gradual transition to a different value on another edge? Is the edge of a value hard or soft or somewhat in between? Does the character of the edge change as you move along, or does it remain constant? There are many things to observe, and as you do this project, I'm hoping that your sensitivity to value and different edges will increase. There are also various methods for applying value. You can apply value in continuous tone by using your blending stump or a piece of paper towel or tissue paper. You can apply your shading in hatching or cross hatching, or also contour hatching, which is following the cross contour of the form. Or you can just try creative types of mark making. Just make sure to keep your marks consistent, or try to at least create a transitional area where you transition from one mark making to another. You can also use subtractive drawing, which is drawing with your eraser. When you do the subtractive drawing, you need to have some sort of value layered initially. So this is going to be effective if you already have some tones down on the paper. And then you can draw with eraser. You have different types of eraser, and you can still continue to make mark making with your eraser. Think of your eraser as a white chalk or a white pencil. The last thing I want to talk about is your still life. So when you set up your composition, the composition also matters, but you can intentionally select items that have symbolic meanings, or they could have potential meaning in relation to another. So they just don't have to be random objects that you find. You can create effective still life and even include some considerable meaning in them. An apple doesn't have to be just an apple, but it could have potential meanings and symbolism behind it. Some symbolic forms are more readily recognized and easily understood, while others are more obscure. Or just by how and where you place your items, some symbolism can come to life. Juxtaposition of objects really matter in this case because based on the placement, associative meaning can arise. It's also important that these objects are grounded on a surface. Try to draw the edge of the table so it looks like the objects are sitting on the table. When you draw the edges of the table, think about the perspective we learned. Your table could be situated in 2-point perspective, or it could be situated in 1-point perspective, depending on where you're sitting in relation to the table. So make sure to identify if you see the big face first, or you see an edge of the cubic form first. That's a way you can recognize if the table is in 1-point perspective or 2-point perspective. The next step is for you to identify the vanishing point that is on your eye level. For 1-point perspective, it's going to be 1 vanishing point. For 2-point perspective cubic form, you're going to have 2 points of vanishing points on the horizon line, which is your eye level. Most likely, for the 2-point perspective, these points will be far away outside of the edge of your paper. So something to note is that it doesn't have to vanish towards the exact point, but just realize that all the parallel and converging horizontal lines should be coming in towards each other, not going away from each other. So this project just summarizes everything that we learned in Unit 2. The 6 categories of value, 1-point, 2-point perspective, think about the cross contour lines in the object, and also most importantly, just be sensitive about observing the transitions of value as well as the transitions of the edge. I'm sure after this project, your observation skills will increase, and you probably will start noticing the structure behind forms, as well as understanding how three-dimensional objects come into life on a two-dimensional sheet of paper using light and shadow. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed this project.